Welcome, sleepless spirit. I'm your storyteller tonight, here to guide you gently into the shadows of slumber, where dreams take over and worries fade away. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more bedtime tales, whispered just for you. Let me know in the comments, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it as you listen tonight? And if there's a story you've been longing to hear, something spooky, something comforting, tell me. I'm always listening. Now, tuck yourself in. Let the darkness wrap around you like a warm blanket. It's time to let go and drift into the story. The night of the night shift. But when you're 22 and in dire need of money, hindsight is a luxury you can't afford. It looked like a simple enough task. A tiny office development on the outskirts of town is under night security, mostly hanging around watching cameras and taking hourly walks for 12 hours. I assumed it would be easy money. The building had a variety of businesses, including an accounting firm, a dental office, and a few other little businesses that I never really noticed. Everything seemed normal to me throughout my first week. Calm corridors, the occasional automobile outside, and the typical settling noises and creaks produced by aged buildings. To kill time, I had taken books and downloaded shows to my phone. I spotted the patrol car for the first time during my second week. I noticed the headlights coming through the front lobby windows at around 2 a.m. while I was making my rounds. There was a police cruiser parked in the lot, just sitting there. Not strange, I thought. Officers most likely took breaks or caught up on paperwork in empty lots. I waved from the window, but I couldn't see if anyone waved back because of how the car was positioned. After around 20 minutes, the automobile departed without any problems. The same thing the following evening, nearly to the minute. 2 a.m. Curious this time, I watched via a darkened office window. The cruiser sat with the engine running, pulling in and parking in the same location. I could make out a figure in the driver's seat, but the distance and illumination made it impossible to see specifics. I timed it by the fourth night, 1:58 a.m. similar to clockwork. After arriving and idling for 20 to 25 minutes, the patrol car would depart. I couldn't quite put my finger on why, but I started to feel that this was related to my presence there. Perhaps it was on their usual patrol route. Perhaps they were watching the new night watchman. It was logical. The fact that they never entered to introduce themselves was incomprehensible. I made the decision to take the initiative. I went outdoors the following evening when the recognizable headlights came on. As I got closer to the cruiser, the cold autumn air caused my breath to create tiny clouds. The car abruptly reversed as I approached within 30 feet of it, but I could still make out the figure of someone inside. Withdrew. Just a hasty departure into the darkness, with no lights and no acknowledgement. I didn't want to express how much that bothered me. The following morning, I made a casual phone call to the local police station. I said that I was the new night security guard and wanted to introduce myself to whoever had been monitoring the area. Although the dispatcher was amiable, she gave me an answer that made my stomach turn. That we were put on hold for a few minutes. No routine patrols are planned for that area at those hours. Sir, are you certain that one of our cars was involved? I explained what I had observed. The norm, everything that appeared official, including the light bar and the black and white cruiser. She claimed she will have someone check into it after taking down my information, but now she was speaking in a more worried tone. I found myself dreading 200 a.m. that night. When the moment arrived, I hid myself in a position that allowed me to observe the parking lot. The automobile showed up just as planned. I saw nuances this time that I had previously overlooked. Something about the car seemed a little strange, but the license plate was too far away to read well. It wasn't quite the appropriate proportions, or it might have been the way the light struck it. I reached for my phone and attempted to use the camera to zoom in, but the picture was too dark and fuzzy to see anything of value. As usual, the car sat there with the motor running and a little revving every now and then. 20 minutes later, it departed. For another week, the pattern persisted. Although I became aware of some minor variations, the automobile might occasionally arrive a few minutes early or late. At one point, I thought I observed someone exit the passenger side, round the building, and then re-enter. However, nothing was visible when I looked at the security cameras the following morning. There was no motion outside during those hours, according to the timestamps. At that point, I began to question whether the cameras were operating as intended. I started testing them, making rounds throughout the building and ensuring that everything was recording by looking at the feeds. They operated flawlessly throughout the day, but there appeared to be pauses at night, particularly from 1:30 to 2:30 a.m. moments where the image would flicker almost imperceptibly, or the timestamp would move forward a few seconds were not particularly noticeable. When I brought this up to my boss, he dismissed it as an outdated system with a few minor bugs. "Don't worry about it," he added, "as long as it doesn't interfere with security during business hours." However, I was concerned. I was somewhat concerned. The discovery was made on a Friday evening, 3 weeks into the position. In an attempt to gain a better look at the person in that car, I had started carrying a tiny set of binoculars that I had discovered in my apartment. I was prepared when it arrived at 1:59 a.m. I could finally see clearly into the front seat through the binoculars. There was undoubtedly a driver, but they had a cap pulled down and appeared to be dressed in a typical police uniform. The fact that they appeared to be staring straight at the structure was what caused me to freeze, staring intently at the windows, not merely observing them casually. At my windows, instinctively, I lowered my heart, thumping. The individual in the car had something in front of their face when I glanced again. Similar binoculars to mine. The two of us were observing one another. That weekend, I had trouble sleeping. On Monday night, something new happened. At 1:45 a.m., the automobile arrived early, and this time, someone undoubtedly got out. A guy in what seemed like a police uniform strolled carefully around the building's perimeter while I watched from a darkened office. They weren't searching for indications of a break-in or examining doors. They were systematically scanning the windows, floor by floor. They stopped when they got to the window, where I typically stand, and just stood there staring up for a whole minute. Their position gave the impression that they knew exactly where I was, even though I was 3 floors above them, and was positive they couldn't see me in the dark. After they got back into the automobile, the car and the figure vanished into the darkness. I pondered whether or not to quit for the remainder of my shift. This patrol behavior was quite strange. I couldn't get rid of the intimate feeling that I was being researched, listed, or worse. I now see that the choice I made the next evening was probably foolish. Whoever this was, I was going to confront them. With only a torch and my phone on record, I prepared myself for anything more dangerous, and I went right outdoors as soon as the car pulled up. I yelled, "Excuse me," as I got closer. "I work here as a security guard. Do you need my assistance with anything?" The engine of the car died. The ensuing hush was deafening. No movement, no reaction that I could see. I approached, perhaps 15 feet away. "Is everyone okay in there?" I made another attempt, but my voice was not as solid as desired. The driver's side door opened at that moment. Although it wasn't exactly incorrect, what came out wasn't right either. The uniform has the right appearance. Utility belt, dark blue badge, everything in its proper place. The wearer's build and general size were appropriate for a police officer. However, something about their posture and movement in the low light made it seem as though they were doing a part they had studied but never quite accomplished. "Evening," they said in a completely normal and courteous tone, simply keeping a watch on things. "Thank you," I said, attempting to sound as informal as they did. "I am the new night watchman, Jake." I felt I ought to introduce myself. They did not provide their name, but they did not. I was still unable to clearly see their face up close. Their faces appeared to be entirely hidden by the cap and shadows. "During your shifts, do you notice anything out of the ordinary?" they inquired. It was a surprise question. Strangely, how? Those that are not fit, vehicles that don't appear to belong, that kind of thing. It nearly made me chuckle. "Actually, only you." The station informed me that there were no routine patrols in this region when I contacted. They were silent for a long time. Their tone had somewhat shifted by the time they eventually spoke. It had a tone I hadn't heard before, but it was still courteous. Perhaps there was a misunderstanding. On occasion, we do informal inspections of buildings that have experienced occurrences, which incidents. They walked back toward their car and stated there was nothing to worry about. Jake, just keep up the good work. Continue to observe. I was left standing in the parking lot by myself, with more questions than answers, as they got back into the car and drove off. 2 months have passed since then. There is no longer any pretense of casual patrol, yet the nightly visits have continued. They arrive at exactly 200 a.m., park, and watch. I sometimes think I see 2 figures in the car, and other times I see just one. I can sense them observing, researching, and waiting for something, even though they no longer come near the building. I've made another attempt to contact the police station, but they now say they are unaware of my earlier call. I've thought about giving up, but every time I do, I recall something the figure said to me that evening. Continue to observe. Did they threaten me, or were they warning me? Was I indeed the object of their observation, or was there anything else I should be keeping an eye on? I observed something new last week. I discovered a tiny piece of paper hidden beneath the entrance door while making my rounds around 3 in the morning. Just a hand-drawn map of the building with X's on a few offices, no words. I've occasionally heard noises in the middle of the night coming from the same offices. Footsteps, doors shutting, phones ringing and then halting. I thought the noises were either the heating system or the structure settling. That paper is still with me. I've spent hours staring at it in an attempt to figure out what it means and why someone would leave it for me, and whether the markings match anything I should have been looking for the entire time. I have another shift tonight. As I type this, headlights are already turning into the parking lot at precisely 1:45 a.m. However, something is different this time. One of the 2 automobiles is pulling around to the rear of the building this time, where there are no windows, no cameras, and no witnesses. Although I should probably call for assistance, I'm beginning to suspect that the people in those automobiles might be the ones to take the call. I'm beginning to believe that I've stumbled upon something far more significant than a security position, something that was underway even before I entered this building. The engines are no longer running. I know they're still out there, waiting, watching, like they instructed me to do, even though both cars are dark now and I can't see any movement. The incorrect turn before that wet Thursday night in October. I had never used exit 47 on my 3-year-old commute home from work. My phone's GPS said that taking this different route would save me 20 minutes because my regular exit was congested with construction traffic. 11 o'clock has already passed, and my only goal was to return home. Even though I had lived in this county my entire life, exit 47 led to a 2-lane road that ran through a section of rural area I didn't recognize. No street lights, dense trees on either side, and a darkness that makes your headlights seem insufficient. It didn't help that it was raining steadily, which made everything appear hazy and unclear. The red and blue lights in my rearview mirror appeared when I was about 10 minutes down this route. My initial reaction was one of annoyance, even though there was absolutely no other traffic, and I had been cautious about my speed. Maybe 5 over, I pulled over onto the small shoulder, put the car in park, and waited with my hands visible on the steering wheel, as is customary. As soon as the police car drew up behind me, I had a strange feeling. Although the lights were flashing, something didn't feel right. Perhaps it was too bright, or the pattern wasn't quite what I was used to seeing, and the car itself appeared older and bigger in my mirrors than the contemporary cruisers I typically saw in the city. I waited for the policeman to come to my window, but he never did. After 5 minutes, 10 came. Behind me, the police car simply sat there with its engine going and lights flashing. They weren't moving, but I could make out a silhouette in the driver's seat. I made the decision to go outside and confront them at last. Perhaps they needed to take care of something before dealing with whatever petty infraction they had stopped before, or they were experiencing radio issues. I walked out my door and into the drizzle. "Everything okay, officer?" As I approached the patrol car, I yelled. The reaction was abrupt and shocking. The vehicle abruptly lurched rearward for roughly 20 feet before coming to a stop once more. The lights were still flashing, but instead of being pulled over, I felt like I was being warned away. For a while, I stood there in the rain, feeling more and more confused and uneasy. I had never heard of a traffic stop that went like this. I made my way back to my vehicle, climbed in, and attempted to consider my alternatives. I could leave in my car, but escaping from police, even odd, unresponsive ones, seemed like a poor concept. I could dial 911. However, what would I say? That a policeman stopped me and refused to speak to me. I made the decision to wait it out. Perhaps they were taking care of another call or running my plates. I sat there with my hazard lights on, sometimes looking at the cruiser behind me in my mirrors. I realized then that there were now two of them. I must have missed the second car because I was too preoccupied with the first, but it was there. About 50 feet behind the first patrol car was another one, to brilliant flashing lights and the same old-fashioned structure. The placement felt purposeful, as if they were boxing me in, but I couldn't tell if anyone was inside. My heart began to race. This was quite unique. This seemed prearranged. I reached for my phone to dial 911, but there was not even a bar of signal. I attempted to move the phone and hold it up to the windows, but to no avail. I had at least some signal when I first took the exit, even though it was a rural region. Another 20 minutes went by. Neither vehicle moved. No officer came forward. The rain was coming down harder, and I was growing more nervous. I now see that the choice I made was either extremely wise or extremely foolish. I intended to carefully drive away and observe the situation. I shifted into drive, signaled my turn, and cautiously re-entered the road. I saw both police cars instantly collide behind me in my rearview mirror while I was keeping a safe distance of perhaps 100 feet. They weren't attempting to stop me again, but their lights were still flashing. I was being escorted by them. Before arriving in a small town I had never seen before, the road continued to meander through the woods for a few more miles. It was a place with only a few streets, a few old houses, a few shuttered shops, and perhaps a population of about 200. Driving down what appeared to be the main street, I saw that despite the late hour, lights were on in a number of the houses, and people were standing in their windows, watching me drive by rather than the police cars. The road forked at the far end of town. I had no clue which way would lead me back to familiar terrain, because my GPS had entirely stopped functioning and was just displaying a blank screen. When I saw that the police cars had halted at the town boundaries, I slowed down and tried to make up my mind. I was no longer being followed. I stopped and turned around. As if to draw a boundary, both cruisers sat there with their lights still blazing. Outside of them, I could see that people had left their homes and were standing in the street, all of them facing me. On the curving road, I took the left fork and sped as fast as I could. After 15 minutes or so, my phone signal returned and I began to notice signs for highways I knew. I didn't tell my wife what had happened, but I was trembling when I contacted her to let her know I would be late. I wasn't certain that I understood it. I attempted to retrace my steps during the day the following morning. In daylight, the route appeared quite different, yet I picked exit 47 once more. A narrow band of trees had replaced what had appeared to be a massive, never-ending forest. I could also make out shopping malls and suburban developments beyond them. The actual road was only roughly 5 miles long before it reconnected with a major highway, which was shorter than I had remembered. There was no spot where the road divided, no small town. My GPS indicated that the route was a straight line with no branches or turns. I persuaded myself that the rain and darkness had confused me, possibly leading me astray without my knowledge. However, the image of those police cars, the way they had parked, and the sensation that I was being hurt rather than stopped lingered in my mind. A week later, I was discussing the incident with a co-worker, omitting the specifics of the stranger and only stating that I had become lost while taking a diversion. He looked at me strangely. Exit 47, he said, for more than a month, that has been closed for work since the beginning of September. He opened the highway department's website on his PC, but I claimed that I had only used it the week before. Exit 47 was indeed marked as concrete barred and closed to all traffic, obstacles obstructing the ramp. I drove back that weekend to make sure. The obstacles were visible, worn, and had been there for weeks. The ramp itself had been demolished and was clearly being rebuilt. No car could possibly have taken that exit in the recent past. However, I had already used it. I recalled every detail. The turn onto the dark road, the GPS recommendation, and the back traffic at my regular exit. It had taken place. I began looking up information on the small town I believed I had passed through online. I looked for historical locations, rural settlements, anything that could account for what I had observed. Instead, I came across a number of years' worth of local newspaper articles and forum threads. Similar incidents, always at night and involving detours or incorrect turns that led to unknown roads, had been recorded by others. Many reported being escorted or followed by police vehicles that refused to answer calls. Some spoke of arriving in tiny towns that appeared to be inhabited just momentarily by those who observed them passing through. There were no explanations for any of these tales. They were typically written off as bewilderment, poor navigation, or forgetting specifics under pressure. The details, however, were disturbingly consistent. The post that disturbed me the most was from an individual who said they had looked up the license plates of the police vehicles that had pursued them. They said that the license plates were from cars that had been out of service for many years, automobiles that ought to have been demolished or put up for auction, and other than being driven on country roads. I tried to recall whether I had been able to see the license plates on the cars at night, but it was difficult to distinguish details because of the rain and darkness. I had to work late again last month, and my normal route home was once again closed. This time, it wasn't construction, but an accident. One of the other routes that my GPS recommended would take me past exit 47. I decided to stick to major routes by taking a longer route. However, I couldn't help but think about those individuals standing and observing me as I went through their village from their windows. The manner in which they had all been up at midnight, perhaps anticipating someone. The way the police cars had pulled over at what seemed like a line, as if they were taking me there instead of shielding me from it. I'd begun to question whether I made a mistake that evening, or whether anything went in the wrong direction toward me, whether I wandered into an area that shouldn't have been there, or whether that location somehow drew me in. When the road split in that town, I've begun to ponder what may have happened if I had taken the right branch rather than the left. I occasionally catch a glimpse of exit 47 when I'm traveling home late, no longer obstructed by obstacles, but open and welcoming. My phone's GPS will indicate that it is available, which will help me save time on my commute. However, even when there is miles of traffic, I continue to drive straight, since I'm beginning to believe that some paths don't lead to your home. They transport you to a completely different place. They've been eagerly waiting for you to take that one incorrect turn, and it never really leaves you after you've been there. Wellness assessment. It began when Mrs. Chen, my neighbor, asked me to watch over her home for 2 weeks while she traveled to Portland to see her daughter. Easy enough. Make sure everything appeared normal, water the plants, and pick up her mail. In the house next to mine, she lived alone. She was a reserved woman in her 70s who was always courteous when we met. When the cops arrived, I had been visiting her home for almost a week. On a Tuesday night, I noticed the patrol car in Mrs. Chen's driveway on my way home from work. Two policemen were strolling around the home, checking doors and peering in windows. I initially assumed that someone had reported a break-in, so I went to inform them that the residence should be unoccupied. Officers, good evening. The neighbor is me. Mrs. Wal Chen is out of town. She asked me to watch the place. Is everything all right? The elderly cop, who was most likely in his 50s and had graying hair, gave me a look that seemed to be sincere concern. A call regarding a wellness check came in. People who called expressed concern for the resident. I hadn't seen her for a long time. Do you know where she went? Portland is going to see her daughter. It's been around a week since she left. Expected to return on Monday of next week. They exchanged a glance that unnerved me. The younger cop, who might have been in his early 30s, took out a notepad. When was the last time you saw her? He inquired. I reflected. When she asked me to babysit the house last Tuesday morning. She gave me her daughter's number in case of emergencies and showed me where the spare key was hidden. Why? The caller identified themselves as a family member who was worried because Mrs. Chen hadn't been picking up her phone for a few days. That was strange. Mrs. Chen had given me the number and had made it clear that she would be staying with her daughter. I took out my phone and gave them the number she had given me. Maybe you should call this number, I said. Her daughter can attest to her presence. The senior officer recorded the number. However, neither of them appeared eager to contact. Instead, they tested the doors and windows as they made their way around the house. I followed, growing more and more uncomfortable with the whole thing. The younger officer stated, "We will have to do a welfare check within the residence, sir. Could you tell us the whereabouts of the extra key?" I was disturbed by the way he said it. I had already provided her daughter's contact details and informed them that Mrs. Chen was out of town and visiting family. Why was it necessary for them to enter? You want to call her daughter first, don't you? That would be the case if she were to stay there. Resolve this really rapidly, the older cop answered. We'll make that call, but we need to make sure the resident is safe first. Standard practice. I showed them where Mrs. Chen kept the spare key under a fictitious rock next to her back door because I didn't know enough about police protocol to disagree, and they were being courteous enough. I waited on the porch, feeling as though I was somehow betraying Mrs. Chen's confidence, while they went inside. They were in there for about half an hour. Despite my best efforts to assist, they were moving around, inspecting rooms, opening closets, and I could hear it. I heard what sounded like drawers being opened at one time and shut down, which looked exorbitant for a checkup on wellness. Their attitude had altered by the time they came out. They appeared more focused and solemn. We need you to come down to the station, sir, so we can ask you some more questions. What was the subject of the older officer's questions? I shared all of my knowledge with you to provide some light on your relationship with Mrs. Chen. Let me know when you last saw her. A shiver went down my back. Am I being arrested? No, sir. We would just thank you for your cooperation. It was obvious that this wasn't actually a request from the way he stated appreciate. My mind racing, I drove my own car to the station and followed them. What was it about Mrs. Chen's home that prompted them to ask me questions? Why hadn't they given her daughter a call? I spent roughly 20 minutes by myself in a tiny interview room at the station. They had a file folder and a different mindset when they got back, more stiff and less amiable. Could you tell us about your relationship with Mrs. Peterson? Chen once more. I told them again what I had said before. 3 years of friendly but distant neighbors. She had requested me to keep an eye on her house while she went to see relatives. She also allowed you to enter her house. She gave me the location of her spare key. Indeed, to water her plants and in case of crisis. Leaning forward was the younger officer. When you last spoke with Mrs. Chen, did she appear upset? Are you worried about anything? No. She appeared to be doing well and was thrilled to see her daughter. How is her mental health? Did she ever appear disoriented or forgetful? I was becoming frustrated. Despite being in her 70s, she's incredibly smart. What's this about? My question was disregarded. The older cop kept it face down on the table and took out what appeared to be an image from the file. We want you to know that this is a serious situation. Mr. Peterson, we have cause to think that Mrs. Chen might not have chosen to leave town. I felt sick to my stomach. What are you saying? In the house, we discovered a few items that worrying us. Personal belongings that a traveler wouldn't often leave behind, such as she would need to carry her daily medications and medication with her. Her ID and credit cards were still in her purse, which was in the bedroom closet. I made an effort to comprehend this. It was odd, but perhaps her daughter had sent her money for the vacation, Or she had packed those items separately. Have you given her daughter a call? Another glance back and forth. Another glance back and forth. We tried calling the number you gave us. It's not connected. It seemed as though the room was getting smaller. That isn't feasible. It was only last week that she gave it to me. We need you to consider carefully. Mr. Peterson, when Mrs. Chen told you she was going to Portland, are you positive? I'm positive, yes. Why would I fabricate that? The older cop slid the picture across the table after flipping it over. There was a problem with the photograph, which was of Mrs. Chen's living room. There was a covering of dust on everything that indicated the room had not been used for weeks, and the furniture was arranged differently than I remembered. We discovered the house today in this manner. Do you see anything out of the ordinary? I gazed at the picture, my brain straining to process what I was seeing. I recalled that the living room was tidy, lived in, as usual. This house seems to have been abandoned for a while. This doesn't seem correct. She showed me the house last week, and it was tidy and typical. We've talked to Mrs. Chen's mail carrier, Mr. Peterson. He claims it's been more than a month since he last saw her. 3 weeks ago. The mail that we discovered in her home was postmarked. I thought I was going to fall. That isn't possible. It's been a week since I started receiving her mail. Which mail? To my increasing dismay, I discovered that I had no recollection of ever taking any mail out of Mrs. Chen's box. I couldn't remember ever really walking to her mailbox or bringing anything inside, but I did remember her asking me to do it in my agreement. I said, and I meant it. I don't comprehend what's going on. For an additional hour, they interrogated me, but I was unable to offer any coherent responses. I got less certain about my own memories the more they told me. Is it true that Mrs. Chen asked me to keep an eye on her house? Or had I pictured that exchange? Had I been breaking into her home for a week, believing I was assisting a neighbor who might not have been there? Eventually, they let me go, but only after warning me not to leave town and to be ready for any more questioning. After a few days, I parked in my driveway, drove home, and gazed at Mrs. Chen's home. It had the same appearance as before, but I had no idea what that meant. I stayed up that night attempting to piece together what I had spoken with Mrs. Chen. The facts felt hazy at the edges, like attempting to recall a dream, but I could still remember her voice, her face, and how she had showed me about her home and indicated which plants need the most water. The cops visited multiple times throughout the course of the following few days. They came several policemen to interview me, asking the same questions in different ways, and kept coming back to the same topics. When was the last time I saw Mrs. Chen? What led me to believe that she had visited Portland? How had I managed to enter her home? Because I could see them observing Mrs. Chen's residence, taking pictures, and bringing in individuals who appeared to be investigators or crime scene technicians. I began to avoid my front windows. There was a lot of conversation in the neighborhood, and I could sense how my neighbors were viewing me differently. A week later, I received a call from a detective who identified herself as an expert in missing persons cases. Compared to the others, she had been more straightforward. We've been looking into Mrs. Chen's disappearance for more than a month. Mr. Peterson, we have proof that she might have been the victim of foul play. Additionally, we have proof that someone has been frequently visiting her home throughout that time. She requested me to monitor it while she was abroad. As I mentioned, we checked with the telephone provider. It had been 6 weeks since Mrs. Chen last used her phone. Her daughter in Portland has been contacted. She claims she wasn't anticipating a visit and hasn't spoken to her mother in more than 2 months. I thought I was going crazy, who then requested me to keep an eye on the house. The detective looked closely at my face. Mr. Peterson, that's what we're attempting to determine. That's what we're attempting to determine. I know they're still monitoring, but they let me go again. I occasionally see strangers taking pictures of my house from across the street, and I also see unmarked automobiles on my street at different hours of the day. Worst of all, I've begun to question my own recollections. Mrs. Chen and I have discussed that exchange countless times, and even though I can still recall it, I still sense that something wasn't quite right. Now, Everything about her, her appearance, her words, even the sound of her voice feels a little strange, like a tape that has been played back to slowly. I was standing in my backyard last night, staring toward her house, trying to recall which plants she had asked me to water. I felt certain that I had been caring for them, but I was unable to name a single particular plant. Using the spare key that was still concealed beneath the phony rock, I went over to make sure. It was a warm evening, yet the house felt cold and dark. I could see that all of her plants were dead in the last of the light. Weeks had passed since their deaths. The new employee getting hired by the Millfield Police Department was, in my opinion, the best thing that had occurred to me in a long time. After being unemployed for 6 months and having numerous applications denied, being recruited as it felt miraculous to have their new administrative assistant, I had always respected police enforcement, and the salary and benefits were good. My first week was rather uneventful, with only 12 policemen covering a community of roughly 8,000 residents. The station was smaller than I had anticipated. Despite having an oddly high number of night shifts for such a tiny department, everyone seemed polite. My boss, Linda, just responded that they take community safety extremely seriously when I questioned her about it. I became aware of the phone calls during my second week. I took most of the calls because my desk was close to the main reception area. Normal things. People who want to talk to specific cops, inquire about permits, or report noise problems. However, there was another kind of call that was frequently received, typically at around 300 p.m. Police Department of Millfield. Sarah is this person. How may I assist you? I must inform you that my daughter has not returned from school. I quickly forwarded the calls to an officer the first several times this occurred. Children going missing are a major matter. However, I began to pay more attention to the nuances after managing perhaps a dozen of these calls in 5 days. Despite the fact that each caller had a unique voice and identity, the stories were very similar, usually described as responsible children who never created trouble. The child should have been home by now. They were last seen either walking home or at school. The fact that I never received any follow-up about these incidents disturbed me. No notifications were sent out. No parents visited the station for information, and no officers hurried out to search. When I questioned Linda about it, she replied that the majority of these calls ended quickly due to things like kids turning up at friends' houses, misunderstandings regarding after-school activities, and the like. But out of curiosity, I began to maintain a log nevertheless, names, timings, and succinct summaries of the callers' reports. 2 weeks later, I had recorded 23 distinct calls regarding children who were missing. Considering it was a small town, that seemed excessive. I made the decision to conduct some independent research. I searched for any articles regarding missing kids or even simply general safety issues in the schools on the website of the local newspaper. Rather, I discovered something perplexing. Over the past year, numerous publications have highlighted Millfield's low crime rate, safety, and status as one of the state's top family-friendly communities. Missing children are not mentioned anywhere. In my third week, when Officer Martinez came by my desk to pick up some paperwork, I became intrigued enough to ask him about the missing children calls. Do the calls you've been forwarding regarding children who are missing typically end well? He stopped going through the files and looked at me strangely. What's the call? The ones that I send to you all virtually every day. Concerning children who have not returned home from school, parents are contacting. The majority of calls that are transferred from the front desk are handled by me, Sarah. It has been months since I received any calls about missing children. A shiver went down my back. That isn't feasible. As instructed by Linda, I have begun moving them to extension 312. Extension 312. He scowled. More than a year has passed since that was unplugged. Prior to his retirement, it was Detective Morrison's direct line. I stayed up late that night and looked through the directory on the phone system. I clearly recall Linda instructing me to forward those particular calls to extension 312 on my first day of training, even though it was marked as unavailable and had been for 13 months. I confronted Linda about it early the following morning. I showed her my notes and added, "I think there might be a problem with our phone system. I've been forwarding calls to a purportedly disconnected extension." She gazed at my log with what seemed to be sincere perplexity. "Where did you get the notion to forward calls to 312, Sarah? During my orientation, you instructed me to. You mentioned that calls regarding children who are missing should be sent to that extension." Linda gazed at me for a while. "I didn't say that. According to our procedure, those calls are forwarded to the person on duty or, in the event that it appears urgent, to 911. I thought I was going crazy. I remembered her telling me about the phone system and stressing that calls about missing children were handled by a professional and should be directed to extension 312. The recollection was clear. She had indicated the list of extensions when we were standing directly at my desk. However, I argued that I've been receiving these calls virtually daily. When I move them to a disconnected number, what happens to them? "To be honest, I have no idea," Linda said. "I find that to be quite peculiar." Over the following few days, nothing changed despite her vow to investigate. The calls continued. No one seemed to care or know where they were headed, so I kept moving them to extension 312. I made the decision to try something. I asked for further information the following time I received one of these calls, rather than transferring it right away. "Please provide your address and your daughter's entire name, ma'am, so I can ensure the appropriate officer answers." A long pause ensued. "I previously discussed this with someone. I apologize, but I can't find any evidence of a prior call today. Can you give me those specifics?" Another pause, this one longer time. The line then stopped working. Over the following 2 days, this occurred 3 more times. The callers would hang up as soon as I requested more detailed information than they had already offered. I began to question whether these calls were pranks, but they seemed too real, too sentimental. The voices had the sound of actual parents who were genuinely concerned about their kids. I now recognize that the choice I took during my 4th week was probably foolish. I remained on the line and attempted to assist rather than forwarding the subsequent call about a missing child to extension 312. "I know you're concerned about your son, ma'am. Could you let me know which school he attends, so I may arrange for an officer to visit, according to her, Millfield Elementary right away? What time does school typically end?" 3:15. I looked at the time. The time was 3:45 p.m. and he hasn't gotten back to you since this morning. "Yes, exactly. Every time he gets home, he phones, but I haven't heard from him." "What is the name of your son?" "Tommy." "Bradford, Tommy. I put it in writing. And if we need to call you back, your phone number." She provided me with a number that included our local area code. Everything appeared reasonable and typical. When her son arrived home from school 30 minutes late, a mother became concerned. "I'll have an officer check the school and the typical route home. Mrs. Bradford, are you able to remain by the phone?" "Indeed, without a doubt. Many thanks." After hanging up, I phoned Millfield Elementary right away. The answering secretary was friendly and supportive. "I'll look through our records," she said following my explanation of the circumstances. "You said Tommy Bradford." "Yes, exactly." "I apologize, but there isn't a student with that name enrolled here." "Are you certain that the spelling is correct?" I experimented a bit, but she was positive. "No. At Millfield Elementary, Tommy Bradford." Mrs. Bradford gave me the number, and I dialed it. I heard a recording after it rang once. "Your dialed number is not operational." At that point, I truly began to get terrified. I tried to understand what was going on for the remainder of the day. Were these elaborate calls for pranks? However, who would bother that much? What made them a test of the department's response mechanism? And why? However, why did no one else appear to be aware of them? I arrived early the following morning and looked over our primary line's call logs. The system indicated that we had received the typical volume of calls the previous day, but Mrs. Bradford's call was not noted. In fact, I was unable to locate any records of the missing children calls I had been receiving until I went back through many weeks' worth of logs. They seemed to have never occurred. I began to question whether I was experiencing a breakdown of some sort. The strain of trying to do well and the stress of starting a new career. Perhaps these calls were all in my head. However, I had jotted down names, times, specifics, and notes. All of that couldn't have been made up, could it? I made the decision to record a call on my personal phone last Friday. At 3:12 p.m., when the next call regarding a missing child arrived, I began recording covertly while speaking with the caller. This time, the father was concerned about his daughter, who had not returned from school. I asked the same questions, received the same responses, and felt the same annoyance when the information didn't add together. I showed my roommate the recording after work. She only heard me talking to myself, asking questions, pauses for unanswered answers, and a one-sided, dead-air conversation. The tape showed that no one had ever been on the other end of the call. I need this job, yet I've been considering leaving, and I have a need to comprehend what's going on. Are these calls authentic? Am I going crazy? Is someone deceiving me with a complex trick? Or is there anything that no one is discussing about this police force? Me. I discovered a folder titled "Personnel Terminated Yesterday" while organizing some old documents. Employment documents of the individual who had my position before to me were contained within. Jennifer Walsh was her name, and she had been employed here for 3 months prior to her termination. Persistent reports of unusual phone calls and an inability to discern between real crises and fraudulent ones were mentioned in her letter of termination. She had been going through exactly what I was. I'm back at my work today, Monday, waiting for 3:00 p.m. to arrive. I am aware that the calls will begin, arriving shortly. Parents seeking assistance from a police department that doesn't seem to hear them, scared about children who might not exist. Right now, the phone is ringing. The time is 3:03 p.m. as instructed. I ought to move it to extension 312, but first, I believe I'm going to question Linda again about who specifically recommended me and why they needed someone to replace Jennifer Walsh so soon. Because I'm beginning to believe that taking these calls is more than just a part of my job. I'm beginning to believe that it's the sole reason I was employed. Protective information. I assumed it was a coincidence when I initially saw the patrol car. Around 7 a.m., I was heading to my car from the coffee shop on Oak Street when I noticed the black and white cruiser parked across the street. The inside cop waved to me casually, as you would wave to any citizen. I waved back without giving it any further thought. However, later that night, I noticed the identical vehicle at the supermarket. The same cop, same friendly wave, different location. It was noteworthy enough that I brought it up to my wife during dinner, but not odd enough to cause concern. Perhaps you have a secret admirer, she said. Another possibility is that they are recruiting for neighborhood watch. The following morning was the third time. Outside my office building, the cop was parked in the visitor spaces, presumably completing paperwork. I could see that he was the same middle-aged man with graying hair. He looked up and gave me a kind nod as I passed his car. He said, "Morning," through his open window. "Good morning, officer. Everything all right? Just fine. You have a good day now, Mr. Thompson." He was aware of my name. I had never made an introduction. I've never interacted with the cops in a way that would have caught their attention. As a tax accountant, I have no criminal record, no unresolved fines, and no reason for or enforcement to be aware of my identity. But he was aware of my name. Before going to bed that night, I noticed a patrol car parked at the end of my street when I peered out my front window. The police and the automobile were different, but they were parked such they could see my house clearly. They were gone an hour later when I checked again. I began to see a pattern over the course of the following week. Everywhere I went in my everyday life, I saw police officers, consistent without being obtrusive or overt. I filled up at a petrol station with a cruiser, a policeman passing the eatery where I had lunch. Before it turned off, a patrol car that was in traffic behind me for a few blocks. I tried to convince myself it was confirmation bias. I was seeing police everywhere now that I was searching for them. However, I found it bothersome that they seemed to recognize me at all times. A nod, a wave, and even a few words if we were near enough, as if they were aware of my identity and wanted me to be aware of their presence. I made the decision to ask directly after 2 weeks of this. Outside the bank, I spotted the greying cop from that first morning. I went up to his car. "I'm sorry, officer. Lately, I've noticed a lot more police officers in my everyday activities. Do I need to be aware of anything?" He seemed genuinely surprised as he looked up from his clipboard. "I apologize, sir. What are you saying? You and your co-workers are people I've seen a lot. I frequently visit my home and workplace. I simply want to know whether there is a safety. I should be aware of the neighborhood problem." The cop scowled. "I believe you may be wrong, sir. In your location, we don't have any specific patrols or concerns. What's your name?" "David Thompson. Elm Street is where I reside." He shook his head after consulting something on his clipboard. "I don't see any red flags or particular instructions for your name or address. Mr. Thompson, perhaps you are simply more aware of our routine patrols than normal." However, he had recognized my name from my office building that morning. I had no doubt about it. "We talked outside the Meridian building last Tuesday, didn't we, officer?" I was referred to as Mr. Thompson. Then he looked closely at my face. "I believe you may be mistaking me for someone else, sir. You're someone I've never seen before today." I left with a more uneasy feeling than before. Either I was recalling our conversation incorrectly, which seemed equally odd, or the cop was lying, which looked unlikely. I could still clearly remember the tone of his voice, the way he nodded when he uttered my name, and how he used it. Over the weekend, I made the decision to test my theory. I totally altered my regimen: separate grocery store, coffee shop, and commute to work, in order to conduct some unnecessary shopping. I even drove to a mall on the opposite side of town. The police remained. There was always someone, even if it wasn't the same cops. At the new cafe I tried, a police officer was enjoying coffee. In the mall parking lot, there was a patrol car that appeared to be tracking my overall movements throughout the mall. As we passed the cereal section of the grocery store, a police who I had never seen before made eye contact and nodded. In an attempt to record what I was witnessing, I began snapping photos with my phone. However, they all appeared to be completely normal when I went back and looked at them later. Officers of the law patrol cars in public areas, performing daily duties, nothing that would seem out of the ordinary to others. My wife became concerned about my actions. "This is getting to be your obsession," she added. "What's the worst that might happen? Even if they are somehow watching you, there is nothing wrong with you." She was correct. There was nothing I could think of that would make the cops want to talk to me. I complied with traffic regulations, paid my taxes, and had never been afoul of the law. The only instance that came to me was one that I had worked on 6 months prior, a corporate audit that had turned up some dubious financial practices, but that had been resolved legally and had nothing to do with illegal behavior. After 3 weeks of this peculiar experience, a change occurred. The officers began talking to me in short bursts rather than merely acknowledging me. As I was leaving the post office, an officer inquired, "How's your day going, Mr. Thompson?" "All right, thanks. Are we familiar with one another?" "Just trying to stay connected with the community. You work in accounting, right?" I hadn't mentioned that to him. "How did you find out?" "Tiny town, word spreads. Now you're safe." While I was waiting for my car to be washed the following day, I started talking to another cop. "You mean Mr. Thompson? What's up with the wife?" My blood froze. "I apologize. You know my wife." "But how?" "Merely having a discussion. Last week, I saw you two at Antonio's for supper. It's good to see that couples still go out together. I couldn't recall seeing any policemen at Antonio's, where we had gone the Tuesday before. Furthermore, Why would a police officer recall seeing us at dinner? I sat down with my wife that evening and filled her in on everything that had been going on. Although she listened calmly, I could see that her eyes were becoming more worried. This seems quite paranoid. David, perhaps you ought to speak with someone. I don't have paranoia. They have information about us, including our routines, where we go, and what I do for a living. Such behavior is not typical of community policing. All right, suppose you're correct. For some reason, let's say they are monitoring you. How would you like to handle it? For that, I had no response. How could I proceed? Complain that I was being treated too kindly by the police. I reported that the law enforcement was providing me with excessive customer care. A month later, the discovery was made completely by chance. I heard two staffers conversing at the DMV as I was renewing my license. Have you handled that request for protective custody? One person said, which one? Thompson. Thomas David on Elm Street. I went cold. They were discussing me. That did really go through last week. The poor guy has no idea. How serious is the threat? They were vague. As previously said, keep eye contact and make sure the civilian is not aware of the protection detail. In a few days, I left the DMV. Custody for protection. I was being kept in the dark about someone's belief that I needed protection. I had been observing a police presence, but it wasn't surveillance. It served as defense. However, what is the protection against? That night, I couldn't sleep, trying to recall if there had been any threats or signs that I might be in danger. I kept thinking back to the business audit I had completed 6 months prior. There had been some angry interactions with the business owners, some claims that I'd been too thorough in my evaluation, but nothing that appeared actually dangerous. I began looking up protective custody protocols on the internet. What I discovered was unsettling. In some cases, law enforcement may safeguard people without their knowledge if disclosing the threat could jeopardize their safety or the integrity of the investigation. However, what research and what danger? I did something that I probably shouldn't have done the following morning. I requested to speak with the person in charge of protection details. When I called the police station immediately, the desk sergeant informed me, "Sir, that I am unable to discuss any continuing protective services. You can report any concerns you may have concerning your safety, and we will investigate. I believe I'm protected already. I'm just curious as to why." A long pause ensued. "Can you wait a minute, sir?" After over 10 minutes of being on hold, a new voice finally answered. "This is Lieutenant Rodriguez. Mr. Thompson, would you be able to visit the station? There are some things we need to discuss." For the past 20 minutes, I'd been sitting in my car outside the police station, unsure of whether or not to enter. I have a part that wants answers. I want to know what's going on, why I've been protected, and what danger I might be facing. A part of me, though, is afraid of what I might discover, because perhaps I'm safer not knowing the specifics if the threat is severe enough to justify a month of secret protection, and if it's so terrible that they couldn't tell me about it. Perhaps it's best to avoid asking certain questions. Through the station window, I can see Officer Rodriguez standing by, anticipating my arrival. I sit in the parking lot, and he keeps checking his watch, occasionally glancing out. Additionally, I just saw that two cop cars had pulled up to the parking lot's exits. I don't believe I'll have an option other than to go inside. The journey to gather a ride along with the cops was never something I wanted to undertake. My professor of journalism came up with the entire concept. She believed it would help me write an article about community policing from an authentic point of view. I attempted to avoid it, but she made it apparent that passing her class required this. When I met Officer Blake at the station on Friday night, he appeared like a decent guy, clean-cut, in their mid-30s, the type of police officer you see on recruitment ads. He briefed me as usual about remaining in the car and not getting involved with police work and maintaining the objectivity of my observations. As we backed out of the station parking lot, he observed, "It's usually pretty quiet around here on nights. If you're hoping for excitement, you may be let down." I told him I didn't mind being silent. All I had to do was spend a few hours watching regular police work and write about it. Nothing spectacular is needed. The first hour was routine, just as he had promised. As we drove through residential neighborhoods, Blake pointed out places where noise complaints or vandalism had occurred. He explained departmental procedures and community outreach initiatives in a clear and professional manner. Ideal content for my piece. Around 9:00 p.m., he received the first call. We have a wellness check request for Unit 23 at 1847 Pine Street. The resident has not been seen by the neighbor in a number of days. After answering the phone, Blake turned to face Pine Street. I was told, pretty standard stuff, by him. These calls come in frequently. Usually proves to be nothing at all. People travel out of town, stay with family, and so on. 1847 Pine Street was a modest home in an older neighborhood that was kept up nicely. As I stood outside the patrol cruiser, watching Blake conduct what seemed to be routine, he knocked on the front door. No response. He strolled around the home, inspecting windows and searching for any indications of strange activity. He was on his radio when he returned. Unit 23, at 1847 Pine. There was no answer. The house looked safe. No indications of disturbance or forced entry. Do I need to contact the person who filed the report? There was a short wait for dispatch to answer. No. Unit 23. Think of the call as finished. I thought that was strange. Wouldn't they want to speak with the person who reported it, acquire further information, and perhaps ask other neighbors? Is that typical? Without contacting the caller again, I asked as we were leaving in our car. Blake looked in the rearview mirror at me. We don't always need to go farther when there isn't any indication of a problem. Perhaps it was a tip from an anonymous source. We received another call 20 minutes later. This time, the wellness check was conducted at an apartment complex located across town. The same pattern. Blake knocked. No response was received. Looked around the structure. Reported that everything seemed to be as it should be. Once more, dispatch instructed him to end the conversation without following up. I was beginning to see a trend by the evening's third wellness check. All three sites were apartments or single-family homes. None of the three led to communication with the resident, and each time, dispatch seems abnormally eager to end the calls without doing any more research. In a single shift, do you typically receive this many wellness checks? I inquired. According to Blake, it varies. There are busier evenings than others. However, his tone made it clear that this was unusual. He appeared more professional, less chatty, and more concentrated than he had been before, the way individuals become when they're dealing with a serious situation. At approximately 10:30 p.m., the fourth call was received. A wellness check has been requested for Unit 23 of Apartment 4B, 2156 Oak Avenue. Same parameters as earlier calls. Blake acknowledged, but I noted that he gave me no explanation this time. I had never seen him seem so sad as he approached Oak Avenue. 4 apartments were created from a converted house located at 2156 Oak Avenue. Blake knocked on 4B's door after we had ascended to the second floor. He tried the doorknob but got no response. It had been unlocked. He pulled out his flashlight and muttered, "That's unusual. Shall we enter?" I inquired. Looking at me, he said, "We really aren't going to any place. You remain in the hallway here." His flashlight beam swept across what I could make out of a tiny living room as he pushed the door open and entered. He returned after about 3 minutes inside. "Am's empty," he said on the radio. "It appears to have been unoccupied for some time. No furniture other than what looks to be simple rental furniture, and no personal items. Unit 23. Copy that. Is there evidence of recent occupancy?" Blake hesitated, then answered, "No." Then answered, "No. Surfaces covered in dust indicate that no one has visited in weeks or possibly months." I couldn't help but wonder, why would someone call in a wellness check if the apartment has been unoccupied for months? As we made our way back to the patrol cruiser, Blake remarked, "Good question," but he made no hypotheses. It wasn't until the fifth call that I realized something was really amiss. Wellness check at 891 Maple Street, Unit 23. The caller expresses worrying about an elderly resident. Newspapers were heaped on the front porch of the little house at 891 Maple Street, which had an overgrown yard. However, I saw that some of the newspapers were recent when we got closer. Yesterday's date, today's. Blake knocked several times before following the others around the home. However, his face was different when he returned this time. In trouble. What is it? I inquired. He whispered, I could see into the back window. The kitchen floor is littered with mail. Lots of stuff. I believe I noticed groceries on the counter as he halted. Fresh food. He described what he had seen and called it in. Dispatch responded differently this time. Unit 23. Hold your ground. We are dispatching a supervisor and backup to your location. We spent nearly half an hour waiting by the patrol car. Blake hardly said anything at that time. He just stood there looking at the home with an expression I couldn't decipher. He simply shook his head when I attempted to ask him questions. Two additional cop cars eventually pulled up. Then an unmarked automobile. I heard a man in a suit and 4 officers huddled around Blake, talking into lower level for me to hear. We talked for a few minutes before the man in the suit came up to me. He introduced himself as Detective Morrison. I recognize that tonight is a ride-along. Indeed, sir, for a course in journalism. For a few minutes, while we deal with this, I'm going to require you to get inside my car. There was no request. As the officers entered the house, I watched through the windshield from the back of his car. They spent nearly an hour indoors. They were all conversing on their radios when they eventually emerged, but I was unable to understand what they were saying. Detective Morrison climbed back into the vehicle and turned on the ignition. Where are we heading? I asked. Return to the station. For tonight, your ride-along is over. In the house. What did you discover? He glanced in the rearview mirror at me. For your article, there is nothing to be concerned about. When I returned to the police, I was shown to a tiny office where Detective Morrison and an unidentified man sat at a table across from me. We need to talk to you about what you observed tonight, Detective Morrison stated. I'm glad to assist, but I'm not sure what I could say that hasn't already been reported by Officer Blake. What you think as a civilian observer is more important to us. Did you notice anything out of the ordinary about tonight's calls? I considered it. Apparently, there were a lot of wellness checks for a single shift, and dispatch's answers were brief, as if they didn't want to do a full investigation. The two men looked at each other. Have you heard anything from Officer Blake regarding the calls? Do you have any feedback regarding the process or the circumstances you faced? Not at all. Throughout, he came across as professional. They asked me a number of other questions, most of which focused on Blake's conduct and manner, including whether he had expressed any peculiar feelings or seemed uneasy. I gave an honest response, perhaps a bit more somber near the conclusion of the evening, but nothing that seemed out of place. He had been professional. Lastly, they made me sign several documents pertaining to confidentiality of continuing investigations and declared me free to leave. What about my article? I inquired. I'd suggest focusing on general community policing initiatives. Detective Morrison stated, the specific events of tonight should probably not be included. That article was never completed by me. I always ended up with more questions than answers when I tried to write about what I had seen. Why had one night seen so many wellness checks? Why had the majority of the places remained deserted? What had they discovered in the last house that needed a detective and backup? And why did they appear to be more intrigued by Officer Blake's actions than by the wellness check's actual findings? A few weeks later, I attempted to follow up by calling the police station, but I was informed that Detective Morrison was no longer available to talk to me. I was also sent to a public information officer, who never called back, with my inquiries regarding the ride-along program. I saw Officer Blake emerge from a coffee shop a month later while I was strolling through the downtown area. His face instantly altered when he spotted me. He was cautious, not aggressive. as if he were meeting someone he had hoped to never see again. He inquired, "How's the article coming along?" However, it sounded as though he wasn't particularly interested in an answer. "I never got it done," I said. "Too many questions I couldn't get answered." As though this weren't shocking, he nodded. "Most likely for the best. May I ask you a question? Were those wellness checks that evening standard practice?" Blake leaned closer to me after taking a quick glance around to see if anyone was listening. Silently, "Let me give you some advice," he said. "Not every story should be recounted. There are some questions that should never be asked." Before I could answer, he left. 6 months have passed since then. Sometimes, especially when I drive by any of the addresses we visited, I still think about that night. 1847 Pine Street has been demolished, as far as I can tell. Now it's just a for sale sign on an empty lot. The Oak Avenue apartment complex has been boarded up. Additionally, there are new occupants at 891 Maple Street, the home with the strewn mail and fresh groceries. A young family with kids who don't seem to know anything about what happened there that evening. What those officers found inside that residence was never disclosed to me. However, occasionally, as I pass it, I notice patrol cars parked on the street close by. Simply they appear to be waiting for another call as they sit there and observe. The exercise for training on a Tuesday afternoon. The notification, written on official city letterhead, arrived in my mailbox. It stated that there would be temporary road closures and the police training exercise. According to the letter, starting Friday night, my neighborhood would be used for a multi-day training scenario. Residents were told to anticipate more police activity and presence, and to stay indoors between 8 p.m. and 6 a.m. at first. I didn't give it much thought. The subdivision we were in was relatively fresh, with little traffic and broad streets. It was a logical place to train. According to the letter, officers from several departments would be involved in developing guidelines for community contact and urban response scenarios. I was reminded of the practice on Friday night when I heard cars arriving in the area. At 7:30 p.m, could see a number of police cars, several unmarked cars, and what looked like a mobile command unit positioned at the entrance to our subdivision when I looked out my front window. With the exception of the occasional patrol car moving slowly through the neighborhood, the streets were silent by 8 p.m. Who took a seat for the evening and watched TV, periodically looking out to observe officers moving about, perhaps rehearsing their patrol patterns. I first observed something that disturbed me at around 1000 p.m. the other side of the street. In the Johnsons' front yard, an officer stood still and facing their home. For some minutes I watched, but he remained still, seemed to be just staring out their windows and doing nothing else. The Johnsons were out of town, and I knew it. They had departed on Thursday morning to spend the long weekend with relatives. Perhaps that was a component of the training scenario when they practiced surveillance on vacant homes. While obtaining my newspaper the following morning, I happened to run into Mrs. Patterson, my neighbor. "Did you notice everything? Activity last night?" she inquired, appearing worn out. "The workout?" "Yes. They did send out a notice." She scowled. "What's the notice?" I received no notification. I explained to her the contents of the letter I had received regarding the multi-day training and the need to remain indoors during the night. "That's odd," she said. "In my 8 years here, I have never witnessed anything like that. Was it formal? Are you certain?" I was certain her response made me think that, even though the letterhead had been authentic with the city seal and all, I should definitely ask my other neighbors if they had received the same notification. During that Saturday, I spoke with 6 neighbors. No note regarding any training activity has been sent to any of them. I was more aware of what was going on outside that night. The cars were the same, and the cops were the same. However, as I began to examine their conduct more closely, things that had looked regular the previous evening began to seem strange. In reality, the officers weren't on patrol. They were setting up shop at particular homes and remaining there for extended periods of time. In the Martinez family's property, I observed one cop stand behind the oak tree for about an hour. Another was seated in an unidentified vehicle that was directly visible through the windows of the Chang's living room, and they all appeared to be concentrated on homes where I knew the occupants were either living alone or were away. I made the decision to read the letter more carefully. The city seal has a slightly strange appearance under a magnifying glass. The paper quality appeared different from other official city correspondence I'd gotten, and the details weren't entirely correct. There was a phone number for inquiries on the letterhead. I received a generic voicemail when I called it on Saturday night. You've arrived at the Office of Community Relations during regular business hours. We will return your call if you leave a message. I left a message requesting further details on the training exercise in my area, such as the department leading it and its completion date. I never got a call back. On Sunday night, the third night of the exercise, I made what was likely a foolish choice. I wanted to see what these officers were really doing up close. At approximately 11 p.m., I crept out my back door and cautiously navigated the darkness between the houses. My blood froze at what I saw. The policeman standing behind the Martinez residence wasn't merely observing. He was using a long-lens camera to take pictures through their windows. An additional officer in the vicinity of the Chen residence was meticulously recording their movements within their residence in a tiny notebook. It wasn't training, it was surveillance. The cop abruptly looked up at me as I attempted to approach to see what he was writing. I held my breath and shoved myself up against a fence. After what seemed like an eternity, he returned to his journal. With my mind racing, I walked as quietly as I could back to my house. Who were these individuals? What was the reason behind their surveillance of my neighbors? The tools they used, their positioning, and their emphasis on particular homes. This couldn't have been random. It was planned and focused. I made a straight contact to the police department on Monday morning about the training exercise that has been going on in the Willowbrook subdivision. I would like to ask some questions. The desk sergeant was informed. I apologize, sir. Which workout? I described what had been going on for the last 3 nights in my neighborhood. I had received the official-looking letter. The police officers are monitoring homes. A long pause ensued. We don't have any planned training activities in that area, sir. Do you have any proof that these were police officers? I felt sick to my stomach. They had police cars and clothes. Everything appeared to be official. Could you explain the cars and their license plate numbers? I became aware that I had overlooked license plates. I hadn't considered recording car numbers. The vehicles appeared to be typical police cruisers. The standard black and white light bars. I'll hand you off to Detective Williams, sir. It sounds like we should investigate this. I gave Detective Williams all the information I could think of, and he said he would send an officer to investigate that night. Additionally, he advised me to stay indoors during the said training hours until they could ascertain the true nature of the situation. I observed the same cars arriving at the regular time on Monday night from the window of my gloomy living room. However, an hour or so later, I saw something different. Real police cars, as opposed to the ones that had entered the neighborhood the night before. The subsequent events resembled a confrontation between 2 distinct police departments. I could make out movement, lights, and moving cars. Although I was too far away to observe specifics, there was obviously some sort of altercation or conversation taking place at the subdivision entrance. All of the vehicles, including the official police cars and the original training vehicles, departed after around half an hour. It was the first time in 4 days that the neighborhood was suddenly utterly silent. The Detective Williams called me the following morning. Last night, Mr. Henderson, we had a look around your neighborhood. No illegal surveillance or training exercises were discovered. What are you saying? I saw the officers and the cars. I spent 4 nights watching them. Sir, there were no police officers in the area when our units got there. There were no personnel or trucks to suggest that an operation of any type had been underway. What I was hearing was unbelievable. But when your officers showed up, I watched them go. Clearly, some sort of interaction had place. According to our police, they patrolled the neighborhood regularly and discovered nothing out of the ordinary. No indications of surveillance gear. No indication of a prolonged presence. How about that letter I got? The formal announcement regarding the training session. If you still have that letter, we'd like to look at it. I found the letter on my kitchen counter and proceeded to retrieve it. It was absent. I looked around my house, every surface, cabinet, and room where I could have placed it. The letter had vanished. There was another lengthy silence when I contacted Detective Williams back to inform him. Mr. Henderson, could it be that you misplaced the letter, or that you forgot some of the specifics of what you saw? I said, I know what I saw. However, I was beginning to question myself even while I was saying it. I began to doubt every aspect of those 4 nights over the course of the following few weeks. Did I actually witness officers snapping pictures and taking notes? Had I dreamed the letter, or had it really existed? The letter's convenient removal, the absence of any tangible evidence, and the fact that the real police found nothing all appeared to neatly and completely erased. However, I was aware that my neighbours had been monitored. I knew for sure. I discovered something last month that made all of my anxieties come flooding back. The neighbour who had never been informed about the training exercise, Mrs. Patterson, informed me that she was selling her home. Why? I inquired. You said you loved living here. The statement, "We've had some security concerns," was ambiguous. It feels like someone is watching us, and things are disappearing. It simply no longer feels secure. After asking around, I learned that 3 other families in our neighborhood had made the decision to relocate within the last 2 months. They all acknowledged feeling uneasy or experiencing strange activity that they couldn't fully explain, along with nebulous security concerns. They all resided in homes that I recalled being watched during the training exercise. A real estate representative called me yesterday to inquire whether I would be interested in selling my home. She replied that my name had surfaced as someone who might be wanting to migrate when I questioned how she had obtained my information. No real estate agent has ever gotten in touch with me. I've never expressed a desire to relocate. I'm sitting in my darkened living room tonight, looking out my window at the street. Even though the training exercise was 2 months ago, I still feel like I'm being watched. In what was once the Martinez family's backyard, I believed I spotted someone standing behind the oak tree a short while ago. 3 weeks ago, they moved out. After being listed, the house sold in a matter of days to a cashier who hasn't moved in yet. I'm beginning to believe that the purpose of the training exercise was never to train officers. I believe I was the only one who failed the test, and I'm beginning to believe it has to do with training residents. The Academy's suggestion had no intention of becoming a police officer. When I was 22, just out of college with a degree I wasn't utilizing, and without a clear life path, the idea originally arose during a routine traffic check. After pulling me over for a broken tail light, Officer Martinez spent the most of our conversation inquiring about my past, schooling, and employment. As he handed the question, "You ever think about law enforcement?" without issuing a ticket, return my license. "Not really," I responded. "Why? You're well built and have excellent communication abilities. The department is constantly searching for qualified applicants." He took a business card out. "Consider it. If you're interested, give me a call." At least I didn't give it much thought. However, I received a direct contact from Officer Martinez a week later. "Hello. This is Rodriguez Martinez from last Thursday's traffic stop. I've been discussing you with a few department personnel. Would you want to stop by and have a casual conversation? Just a discussion about opportunities. No commitment. I had a part-time job in retail that was not paying well. I reasoned, why not? What might be wrong with speaking? Everyone I saw was remarkably amiable and interested in me personally, and the police station was smaller than I had anticipated. Martinez presented Sergeant Collins as a recruiter, and he spent more than an hour inquiring about my aspirations, background, and family history. He stated that we are constantly searching for policemen that possess the ability to think on their own. Individuals have the ability to view problems from multiple perspectives and make sound decisions under duress. He gave me a tour of the station, presented me to a number of officers, and by the time the visit was over, I was sincerely intrigued by the prospect. The idea of meaningful employment was alluring, the compensation was respectable, and the perks were good. What will happen next? I inquired. Although the application process is often drawn out and includes background checks, written tests, and physical fitness evaluations, we can occasionally move things along more quickly for the right applicant who comes highly recommended. Who made the recommendation? Officer Martinez says you're extremely good. Instead of waiting for them to apply through the regular methods, we occasionally find possible officers through relationships in the community. Sergeant Collins called me a week later to inform me that I had been accepted into an expedited training program. Wait, I said. I still haven't applied. I haven't completed any papers or taken any examinations. We've taken care of the prerequisites. You have been given pre-approval for the training program based on your background and Martinez's suggestion. If you're interested, you can begin on Monday. I needed the work, and the prospect was alluring, but it looked too good to be true. Yes, I replied. The training course was not at all what I had anticipated. It was just 3 of us in a repurposed office building across town. Not a big academy with dozens of recruits. Lieutenant Hayes, our instructor, clarified those applicants with exceptional potential were the focus of this experimental initiative. Conventional academy instruction is intended for mediocre applicants and big groups. This program is more individualized and intensive, he stated. We're getting you ready for specialized positions in the division. It was a strange curriculum. We barely touched on law enforcement tactics or normal police procedures. Rather, the majority of our instruction concentrated on community engagement, observation techniques, and what Hayes referred to as behavioral assessment. He clarified that modern police involves more than merely upholding the law. It's about getting to know people, seeing trends, and figuring out who might benefit from more help or attention. We rehearsed interviewing methods, but not for suspects or witnesses. In order to learn more about people's everyday routines, relationships, concerns, and habits, we acted out scenarios. According to Hayes, the objective is to create community member profiles that will improve service and enable us to spot possible issues before they become more serious. The obvious question was posed by Sarah, one of my fellow trainees. Isn't this essentially monitoring? Hayes grinned. It's involvement with the community. You're not snooping around, you're learning about them. Our ability to serve and defend our community will improve as we get a deeper understanding of it. Following 2 weeks of instruction, I began to feel uneasy. I had assumed that police training would cover topics like emergency response, traffic enforcement, and criminal law, but we weren't. Rather, we were getting quite effective at using casual conversation to elicit personal information from people. When will we begin to learn about real-world police work? In a break, I asked Hayes. He said that this was police work. It's just not the same as what you see on television. A practical test was our last task. We were given the task of spending a day in various neighborhoods, interacting with locals, while posing as community safety survey participants. Our true objective was to learn as much as we could about each household, including the people who live there, their routines, their worries, and their habits. Meadowbrook is a suburban community where I was placed. Equipped with a clipboard and formal-looking survey papers, I went door to door for 6 hours, discussing community needs and safety concerns with locals. At first glance, the survey questions were harmless enough. How long have you been a resident of the area? Is it safe for you to walk by yourself at night? Have you recently observed any strange activity? However, as I went through the list, I became aware that the questions were intended to elicit extremely detailed information about people's social relationships, routines, and weaknesses. By the end of the day, I had comprehensive profiles of 23 households, complete with details on family dynamics, work schedules, security systems, and other issues that the occupants most likely shouldn't have discussed with the stranger. Hayes looked over my surveys with evident delight when I got back to the training facility. He remarked, "Excellent work. You're naturally gifted at interacting with the community. What becomes to this data? I inquired. It enters our community database, aids in more efficient resource allocation, and identifies households who may require more support. I kept thinking about the families I talked to that night. The old man who informed me of his prescription regimen. Her ex-husband's harassment was mentioned by the single mother. The pair went into great depth about their vacation preparations. My credentials had not been requested by any of them. None of them had asked why such private information was required for a police survey. Since I had informed them that I worked for the police department, they had trusted me. I called Sergeant Collins the following morning. I have a question for you regarding the training course. Is this training for police officers or something else entirely? A pause occurred. What are you saying? Nothing regarding law enforcement has been revealed to us. Just information gathering, no arrest techniques, no criminal procedures, no legal training. Different talents are needed for different assignments. According to Collins, not all police positions entail the typical patrol responsibilities. For what specific job am I receiving training? One more pause. Job as a community liaison, developing connections with residents, determining the requirements of the community, and obtaining information about any problems. Information, observations, intelligence, and input from the community. It's all a part of contemporary law enforcement. Feeling more uneasy than before, I hung up. I made the decision to look into the department's organizational structure that afternoon in order to find out more about specialized units or community liaison jobs. I was disturbed by what I discovered. There were no specialist intelligence units, no community liaison roles, and no reference to the kind of job Hayes had outlined for my future career on the department's official website or organizational structure. I began to question whether the people I had polled in Meadowbrook would get the additional consideration Hayes had spoken of. I gave my fellow trainee, Sarah, a call to check on her. Sharing similar worries, she answered, "I've been thinking the same thing. This doesn't feel like training for the police. We feel as though we are being taught how to spy on others." We decided to get together and share our notes. When we investigated, we found that the 4 trainees had all been assigned to comparable tasks in various neighborhoods, gathering the same kind of in-depth personal data about the locals. Sarah added, "I researched the neighborhoods to which we were assigned. All of these neighborhoods have seen sharp increases in property values, making them potential targets for developers looking to purchase homes for a future construction." It was obvious what was implied, and it sickened me. Were we collecting data that might be used to compel locals to sell their houses? Were we spotting susceptible individuals who might be persuaded to move? I made the decision to speak with Hayes directly. When I discovered him in his office the following morning, I remarked, "I need to know what this training program is really about." "That's what I explained," he said. "Establishing connections, obtaining intelligence, and community policing. What is the aim of intelligence? For whose department is this? Who is getting the data that we are gathering?" Hayes looked at me for a while. "You are questioning the program. Whether this is actual police training is something I'm questioning." Slowly, he nodded. "This kind of employment isn't for everyone. It calls for a certain amount of mental flexibility and an awareness that there are numerous ways to perform community service. Are we genuinely receiving police officer training? Once the program is over, you will be officially certified." I didn't ask that question. Looking out at the parking lot, Hayes got up and headed to his window. "Mr. Wilson, there are some issues in the community that call for unconventional solutions. Some services are better served by those who are not constrained by the rules of traditional law enforcement." A shiver went down my back. What resources are available? How can information be gathered? How can relationships be cultivated? And how can specific citizens be encouraged to think about moving when it's best for both them and the community? I never returned after leaving his office. After 2 months, I discovered that the Meadowbrook neighborhood, where I had been conducting surveys, was undergoing a rationing process for the purpose of commercial development. Real estate brokers had unexpectedly visited several of the families I had spoken to and offered to buy their houses for significantly less than market value. The elderly man I interviewed, who shared his prescription regimen with me, had been broken into. Although nothing was taken, it was obvious that someone had searched his residence for a particular item. Anonymous phone calls suggesting she might be safer living somewhere else had begun to arrive for the single mother. Sergeant Collins had left the department when I attempted to phone the police station to report my suspicions. My original recruit, Officer Martinez, had moved to a different precinct. With a for lease sign in the window, the training center, where I had spent 3 weeks learning how to obtain personal information from unwary locals, was now deserted. One of the people who called me last week claimed to be Detective Barnes. We know that a few months ago, Mr. Wilson, you took part in a community training program. We have some questions for you regarding that encounter. Are you looking into the program? We're looking into various anomalies in specific outreach initiatives in the neighborhood. Could you please come talk to us? I consented to see him. However, the training program had taken place in the same vacant building when I got to the address he had provided. In the same room that Lieutenant Hayes had shown us how to conduct surveillance under the pretext of community policing. Detective Barnes was waiting for me. We have a proposition for you, Mr. Wilson, he replied. A chance to put your training to good use in a legitimate capacity. I went away after turning around. However, I saw that more individuals were entering as I was leaving the facility. I see young individuals my age with clipboards and identity cards that look official. There was a new training session beginning, and I came to the realization that there are neighborhoods in the city where people have complete faith in anyone claiming to be conducting a police poll, who are prepared to divulge the most personal information about themselves to strangers who swear to protect them. Those who are unaware that their confidence is being used against them. The volunteer initiative on a Wednesday morning. The leaflet showed up in my mailbox, sandwich it between a grocery shop circular and the utility bill. The volunteer program for citizen police featured a polished image of cops in uniform shaking hands with happy citizens. The explanation provided it seems simple: participate in community events, participate in administrative duties, assist officers in their non-enforcement endeavors. Since I had moved to Riverside 6 months prior, I had been feeling cut off from my neighborhood, so the volunteer opportunity sounded like a nice way to get engaged and make a significant contribution. Only 4 hours a week, primarily evening shifts, and no prior law enforcement experience were required, making the time commitment manageable. Officer Davidson sounded excited about my interest when I called the number listed on the leaflet. We're always looking for responsible citizens who want to make a difference, he stated. Are you able to attend an orientation on Saturday morning? About a dozen additional possible volunteers attended the orientation, which took place in a conference room inside the police station. According to Officer Davidson, we will assist with a variety of community engagement initiatives, crowd management during public gatherings, and administrative support during peak times. We're mostly searching for dependability, prudence, and sound judgment. He continued, you'll sometimes be exposed to sensitive information, so we need people who understand the importance of confidentiality. Everything appeared to be in order and legitimate. We were provided with a schedule of open volunteer times, identification cards, and background check paperwork. I registered for Thursday nights at 6 p.m. starting the following week. Until 10 p.m. my initial shifts went exactly as planned. I helped with data entry, arranged neighborhood safety leaflets, and gave directions to guests in the police station lobby. I felt like I was making a tiny but significant contribution, and the police were cordial and competent. I immediately became aware of anything strange on my 4th shift. I was asked to assist Officer Davidson with what he referred to as community outreach calls. He clarified that volunteers occasionally helped with these calls to free up officers for more pressing tasks, and the department called citizens on a regular basis to inquire about their safety and get their opinions about police services. It's fairly simple, he continued. passing me a list of contact details and a script. Simply dial the numbers, introduce yourself as a volunteer police officer, and inquire if they require any help or have any safety concerns. The script was straightforward and expertly written. In addition to introducing myself and stating that I was phoning on behalf of the police department, I was to ask a number of standard questions regarding recent issues, neighborhood safety, and whether or not they had had any good or bad experiences with the police. The initial calls proceeded as planned. Many had minor problems that they were happy to discuss, and the majority appeared to be thrilled to hear from the police department. Outages in street lighting, fast-moving vehicles, and sporadic noise complaints. I dutifully filled out the form that Davidson had given me with their answers. However, I began to notice that some of the questions on my form were more specific than what I was reading from the script as I went on making calls. Information about security systems, job schedules, household composition, and recent trip plans were all requested on the form. Details that hadn't organically surfaced during the discussions. When I questioned Davidson about the disparity, he clarified that volunteers were supposed to collect more data when locals appeared open to sharing it. According to him, people frequently provide us more information than we particularly request. We want to get information if someone talks about their job schedule, their security setup, or that they're traveling out of town. It enables us to deliver superior service. I felt uneasy about that, even though it made logical. I wasn't convinced residents knew that this level of detail was being recorded, and the extra inquiries felt invasive. I was assigned a different kind of task during my 5th shift. In order to check on residents who hadn't been visited recently, Davidson asked me to assist with community health checks. Sometimes neighbors or family members contact us with concerns about someone they haven't heard from, he said. Rather than sending an officer for a formal welfare check, we often start with a phone call from a volunteer. He provided me a list of numbers, along with a few brief remarks on each individual. An elderly person lives alone. Neighbors have not seen it in a number of days. Typically, a single lady walks her dog every day. A normal adjustment was noticed by the neighbor. The family of a recent widower is worried about depression. These calls seemed more authentic. It looked like a perfect fit for a police volunteer to check on vulnerable members of the community. However, as I made the calls, I observed that many of the people I talked to didn't appear to understand why they were being called by the police. One old man said, "I'm all right. I was simply spending a few days with my kid, who claimed to be worried about me." He was perplexed when I informed him that a neighbor had called the police. I informed Mrs. Henderson that I was leaving. The only neighbor I truly spoke to was her. I noted that I should question Davidson about this, but when I brought it up later, he said that occasionally reports came through indirect means, and that worried residents didn't always give their names when contacting the police. Something that occurred on my 6th shift caused me to truly consider what I was doing. During my neighborhood outreach contacts, I spoke with a woman who appeared to be in real difficulty. "Thank God you called," she said. "I've spent the entire week attempting to get in touch with someone at the police department. I believe someone was in my backyard last night, and someone has been rummaging through my mail. I didn't know how to respond to this. I was astonished by Davidson's response when I told him about this. He said, "We'll deal with that internally. Do not be concerned about pursuing it." However, she appeared to be somewhat worried. Someone ought to go see how she's doing. Not every report needs to be addressed right away. We'll assess it and react accordingly. However, his tone gave the impression that nobody would even bother to check on her. I was thinking about the woman's call all night long. I decided to go up the police department's online incident reports to see if her complaints had been registered. I couldn't find any record of her calls or concerns. In order to follow up on a community safety concern, I called the police station directly the next day and asked to speak with someone. I was informed that they had no recent calls regarding suspicious activity from the address I gave after being transferred multiple times. I began to question whether the volunteer program was in any way distinct from regular police work. Perhaps a different system or department was handling our calls and reports. I made the decision to put this idea to the test during my 7th shift. I paid close attention to what was going on in the volunteer workplace rather than making the designated calls. I overheard additional volunteers making same calls, inquiring comparable queries. However, I also observed that we appeared to be cut off from the other activities of the police station. We had little contact with ordinary police officers, worked in a different room, and used distinct computer systems. I was informed that volunteers were only allowed to work in the designated volunteer workspace for security reasons when I attempted to enter the main station area. Additionally, I observed that the data we gathered, all of those comprehensive forms pertaining to people's personal circumstances, household schedules, and safety concerns, was kept in cabinets apart from the main police filing systems. When I questioned Davidson about it, he clarified that before being entered into official records, information gathered by volunteers was put through a separate processing system to make sure it was correctly validated. However, I was beginning to believe that there was absolutely no integration of information into official records. I made a choice on my 8th shift that most likely went against every confidentiality agreement I had ever signed. I called a number of folks and noted their names and phone numbers so I could call them later to find out how their experiences with the police volunteer program went. My greatest concerns were confirmed by the first person's response when I called her the next day. I never received any call from a police volunteer, she claimed. Are you sure you have the right number? I gave a detailed account of our conversation. She mentioned freshly installed security cameras, her travel plans for the upcoming month, and her worries about speeding in the neighborhood. I never told those things to anybody, she remarked, especially not someone posing as a police officer. Who did you claim to be? Feeling ill, I hung up. Either I was going crazy, or there was a serious problem with the volunteer program. If she didn't recall our chat, I gave to more individuals on my list a call. The same answer. No recollection of a conversation with a volunteer police officer. I have no memory of disclosing the private data I meticulously documented on my paperwork. I researched the Citizen Police Volunteer Program that weekend. On the website of the police department, I was unable to locate any official information regarding it, not mentioned in the city council minutes, no financial allotments, and no news releases regarding volunteer projects in the community. I asked to talk to someone about volunteer possibilities when I contacted the main number of the police department. As of the now, we have no programs for civilian volunteers. According to the desk sergeant, approximately 2 years ago, our citizen patrol program was halted. How about the volunteer program for citizen police? It is operated by Officer Davidson. I don't know any Officer Davidson, and I'm not familiar with that program. Do you want me to check with another person? Before he could transfer me, I hung up. My 10th volunteer assignment was scheduled for Monday night. I asked to talk to a supervisor about the volunteer program instead, so I drove to the police station. I waited a while before Detective Morrison emerged to talk to me. I have some questions for you, sir, regarding the volunteer program you've been a member of. Could you provide me any supporting documentation you have? I presented him with my volunteer ID badge, the original brochure, and the schedule I had been given. After giving them a thorough inspection, he excused himself for a few minutes. He was looking glum when he came back. These materials do not come from our department, sir. Although it's a good imitation, the badge isn't real. The address, a business mail service, not a police station, is identified as the volunteer program office. However, I have 2 months of experience at the police station. To which address have you been traveling? I told him the address where I had been going to work. He scowled. A county government facility is located around 2 miles away from here. The police department is not housed there, but a number of other agencies are. The globe seemed to be tilting. So, for whom have I been employed? Detective Morrison stated that we must determine that. Additionally, we must get in touch with everyone who has been getting these enigmatic calls from a person posing as a volunteer police officer. I've been attempting to piece together what happened for the past 3 weeks. The structure I believe to be there is voluntary work. Additionally, several of its offices could be mistaken for police headquarters by an uninformed person. However, there is no documentation of a citizen volunteer program there. I didn't give the police the phone numbers I phoned, the personal data I gathered, or the thorough reports I submitted. According to Detective Morrison, they are looking into it, but they haven't been able to determine who was in charge of the phony volunteer program or what they were trying to do with all that private data on locals. Someone called me last week and said they were from the police department doing a poll on community safety. The professional and kind voice inquired about my daily routine, neighborhood, and safety concerns. I was on the verge of answering the questions for a second. I hung up after realizing what was going on, but I couldn't help but worrying how many other people were getting these calls. How many people are willing to assist with what they consider to be authentic police community outreach? And what is someone doing with all that data on who lives alone, when they go on vacation, when they leave for work, and what security measures they have? I've been considering calling everyone on the lists I committed to memory to alert them to the possibility that their personal data may be being used for purposes they never consented to. However, I later recall that none of them appeared to recall ever speaking to me, and I question whether I'm the only one who has any recollection of any of this. The beat of digital on a Tuesday morning, when I was enjoying some coffee, the app notification appeared on my phone. Alert for SafeWatch. There have been reports of suspicious activities in your area. To get details and contribute to community safety, tap. About a month ago, I downloaded SafeWatch, but are seeing advertisements for it on the social media page of the local police department. The purpose of the app was to give locals real-time information about events occurring in their neighborhood and to assist them in reporting safety concerns. It seems to be a useful method of keeping up with current events. A map with a red point approximately 3 blocks from my residence was displayed in the notice. An unfamiliar person was seen photographing homes on Maple Street. The concerned citizen submitted the report. Please file a report if you know anything about this activity. I didn't give it much thought. In neighborhoods, people are constantly taking pictures. Delivery drivers, insurance adjusters, and real estate brokers are all changing their systems. However, I kept getting warnings about the same general location throughout the day. Someone peeping into car windows, someone strolling around yards, or someone posing shady inquiries about locals. I received 6 warnings regarding suspicious activities within 4 blocks of my house by the evening. In what I had always thought of as a tranquil neighborhood, that seemed like a lot for one day. A different kind of message arrived the following morning. The community has requested SafeWatch. Your neighbors require your assistance in keeping an eye on persistent issues with safety. Offer to contribute to Neighborhood Watch. The notification clarified that active contributors received priority alerts regarding safety issues, and that locals might accrue points by reporting suspicious activity with verification. It made sense. More specific information regarding possible issues should be provided to those who are actively keeping an eye on their community. I got a welcome message with guidelines for efficient community monitoring as soon as I clicked sign up. The software offered instructions on how to record suspicious activity, what kinds of actions to look out for, and when to file reports, as opposed to phoning the police. The instructions were comprehensive and appeared to have been written by experts. Keep an eye out for anyone who seems to be interrogating people about their schedules and routines, taking pictures without a clear purpose, or conducting surveillance. Keep in mind that many suspicious behaviors could seem innocent at first, so it's important to pay close attention to details. I was working in my front yard that afternoon when I saw someone strolling slowly down the street, pausing now and then to gaze at houses. As directed by the app, I paid closer attention to him. He did appear to be giving various things exceptional attention, and he pulled out his phone multiple times as though taking pictures or recording something. I turned in my first report. Someone appears to be monitoring residential buildings on Oak Street. The subject seems to be recording landscape information and house numbers. I got an answer in a matter of minutes. I appreciate your attention to detail. Our community safety database now has your validated report. 10 Safe Watch points have been awarded to you. The prompt response was pleasing. I believed I was making a significant contribution to community safety. I started paying more attention to what was going on in my neighborhood during the course of the following week. I was aware of how many potentially suspicious events occurred each day, thanks to the app. Unfamiliar faces, cars parked in odd places, people who appeared to be watching other than simply moving through. During that week, I turned in 4 additional reports, each time getting quick points and appreciation. But I also began getting more thorough notifications about local actions, some of which worried me. For the past week, the resident of 847 Pine Street has been seen leaving the residence at the same time every day. The pattern points to a consistent absence in the afternoon. The elderly person at 932 Oak Street seems to live alone and is rarely visited. For welfare reasons, a property could need more surveillance. Despite installing a security system recently, the family at 615 Maple Street keeps the ground floor or windows open in the evening. Reports of suspicious activities were not made. They served as profiles of the people's daily activities. Instead of merely keeping an eye out for illegal activity, the app appeared to be urging users to keep an eye on their neighbors' daily routines and weaknesses. I was upset enough to inquire about the SafeWatch app over the non-emergency number of the police department. Your department has been marketing a community safety app, which is why I'm calling. A few of the notifications appear to be more about surveillance than preventing crimes. I spoke with a desk officer who was perplexed. Which app are you talking about? I talked about SafeWatch and said that they had been promoting it on social media. He checked something, and there was a pause. No third-party safety app is recommended by our department, sir. Although I'm not aware with the app you're discussing, I noticed it shared on your Facebook page. We have our own official app for reporting crimes. I would have to investigate that. Could you tell me the app's precise name? He said he would check with their social media coordinator once I gave him the details. But it sounded like this was the first time he had heard of SafeWatch. I took a closer look at the police department's social media profiles at night. Although I was positive I had noticed SafeWatch there when I originally downloaded the program, I was unable to locate any posts endorsing it. Additionally, I began to pay more attention to the other people who were using SafeWatch to send reports. Anonymized reports from other contributors were displayed on the app, and I found that there appeared to be a lot of activity from people in my neighborhood, much more than I would have anticipated for a neighborhood this size. The level of information in several of the accounts was unsettling. The subject at 423 Oak Street keeps a regular work schedule, leaving at 7:45 a.m., coming back at 6:15 p.m., lives alone, and has no obvious security system. Residents of 756 Pine Street, which is not occupied at the moment, based on the amount of mail that has piled and the absence of activity over the last 4 days. The family seems to be on vacation. When working in the backyard, the person at 892 Maple Street usually leaves the rear sliding door unlocked. This was not a report on neighborhood safety. This involved acquiring intelligence on the routines and weaknesses of the population. I made the decision to try something. I filed a purposefully fictitious complaint regarding suspicious activity on a street that didn't exist in our neighborhood. After accepting the report, the app gave me points and congratulated me for being watchful. A fraudulent report ought to have been rejected or flagged if SafeWatch was authentic. Rather, it was handled in the same manner as the rest of my submissions. My stomach dropped when I got a notification the following day. SafeWatch Premium, an invitation. You have been chosen to participate in our premium monitoring program due to your regular contributions and thorough observations. Real-time resident tracking and sophisticated behavioral analysis tools are examples of enhanced functionality. Although I declined the offer, its existence validated my darkest fears. This software was being used by someone to recruit by spying on their neighbors. Locals can learn specific information about their habits, safety precautions, and weaknesses. When I attempted to delete my SafeWatch account, the program stated that I would have to get in touch with customer support in order to get my data deleted. An automatic response from the customer support email address stated that my request had been received and will be handled in 30 business days. I was still getting notifications in the meantime, but I was now interpreting them differently. Every notice signified that someone in my community was being watched, profiled, and possibly singled out. Packages have been left on the front porch of the residence at 534 Pine Street for prolonged periods of time. The person at 721 Oak Street hardly ever leaves the house and seems to have restricted mobility. Teenagers from the family at 489 Maple Street regularly leave the house unaccompanied in evenings. Starting with the residents on the streets included in the most alarming reports, I made the decision to alert my neighbors about the app. However, I received unexpected responses when I knocked on doors to share what I had found. She remarked, "Oh, I love SafeWatch at 534 Pine Street. I'm a lot more conscious of what's going on in the area now. This month, I've reported at least a dozen suspicious behaviors. That app has been a godsend," the old man at 721 Oak Street stated. "I've assisted law enforcement in identifying a number of individuals who shouldn't have been in the region." The mother at 489 Maple Street said that her children were the ones who downloaded it initially. They enjoy receiving points for maintaining neighborhood safety. They all appeared unconcerned by the in-depth monitoring of the inhabitants. All of them regarded SafeWatch as a valid community safety tool, and a number of them said that the app had acknowledged their hard work in reporting. They all maintained that the app was making the neighborhood safer, despite my attempts to voice my concerns about the intelligence collection and the absence of police department support. One neighbor remarked, "I get alerts every day about suspicious people in the area. I wouldn't be aware of half the risky activities occurring here if it weren't for SafeWatch. The app has helped us identify several individuals who were clearly up to no good," stated another. Just last week, a man was accused of taking images of homes, and it was discovered that he had been scouting the area for potential burglaries. However, none of them were able to give me information when I asked about these occurrences, police reports, arrests, and verified criminal conduct. Although they had all heard of preventing risky situations, none of them could provide specific examples of crimes being prevented or criminals being apprehended. I became aware of the feedback loop that SafeWatch had established. The app urged locals to consider routine events unusual, and then claimed that these observations had prevented crimes, hence validating their claims. Although users were only building thorough surveillance profiles of their neighbors, they believed they were making their community safer. I couldn't remove my account data, but last week I got a message that forced me to deactivate the app right away. Alert for SafeWatch. We've marked your monitoring activities for evaluation. Unreliable reporting trends raised the possibility of a security issue. Within 48 hours, a community liaison will get in touch with you to talk about the status of your account. Although I never received a response from a community liaison, I've begun to notice several things that lead me to believe that my worries regarding SafeWatch were well-founded. In addition to being excited about the app when I spoke with her, my neighbor across the street just installed security cameras that are positioned to watch the entire street, not just her own home. Another neighbor inquired about my work schedule in great detail, saying he was attempting to arrange the scheduling of the neighborhood watch, but wanted to know the precise times I left each morning and came back each evening. Additionally, I've noticed strangers strolling around the area and pausing to take pictures and write down details about various homes. Upon approaching them, they have asserted that a community safety assessments carried out by SafeWatch users. I discovered a tiny gadget fastened to the underside of my mailbox yesterday. It appeared to be some sort of surveillance or tracking apparatus. However, I was unable to locate any information regarding comparable gadgets on the internet when I attempted to investigate what it was. I took it off and tossed it. However, I discovered this morning that one of my neighbors was photographing my house from the other side of the street. He glanced away and left as soon as I waved at him. I'm beginning to believe that SafeWatch was doing more than using the app to collect information about the inhabitants. I'm beginning to believe it was to attract locals in order to learn more about one another. Additionally, I'm concerned that by challenging the app and attempting to alert my neighbors, I've come seen as someone who requires closer supervision. There was a fresh notice on my phone just now, but it wasn't from SafeWatch. It comes from a different app called Neighbor Alert that I can't recall ever downloading. According to the notification, "Welcome to Neighbor Alert. Your neighborhood has suggested you as someone who is concerned about safety in the neighborhood. To begin defending your neighbors, tap here." Although I haven't pressed anything, I'm curious to know how many of my neighbors have downloaded this new app and what and how are they being requested to keep an eye on.